Hello everybody. So now 4 children have gone because they didn't listen to instructions. Do you know how many children are left? That's right, just 1. Which room shall it be next, said Mr. Wonka, as he turned away and darted into the lift. Come on, hurry up, we must get going. How many children are left now? Little Charlie looked at Grandpa. Grandpa looked back at Charlie. But Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe said, there's only Charlie left now. Mr. Wonka swung around and stared at Charlie. There was a silence. Charlie stood there holding tightly onto Grandpa Joe's hand. You mean you're the only one left, Mr. Wonka said, pretending to be surprised. Why, yes, whispered Charlie, yes. Mr. Wonka suddenly exploded with excitement. But my dear boy, he cried out, that means you've won. He rushed out of the lift and started shaking Charlie's hand so furiously it nearly came off. Oh, I do congratulate you, I really do. I'm absolutely delighted, it couldn't be better. How wonderful. I had a hunch, right from the beginning it was going to be you. Well done, Charlie. Well done. This is terrific. Now the fun is really going to start. But we mustn't dally. We have an enormous number of things to do before the day is out. Just think of the arrangements that have to be made and the people we have to fetch. But luckily for us, we have the great glass lift to speed things up. Jump in, my dear Charlie. You too, Grandpa Joe. No, after you, that's the way. This time, I shall push the button we're going to press. Something crazy is going to happen now, Charlie thought. But he wasn't frightened. He wasn't nervous. He was excited. And so was Grandpa Joe. Charlie and Grandpa Joe both craned their necks to read what it said on the little label beside the button. It said, up and out. Up and out, thought Charlie. What sort of room is that? Mr. Wonka pressed the button. The glass doors closed. Hold on, cried Mr. Wonka. Then wham! The lift shot straight up like a rocket. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe. Charlie was clinging to Grandpa Joe's legs, and Mr. Wonka was holding to a strap from the ceiling. And they went up, straight this time. Yippee! Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe. Faster, faster, cried Mr. Wonka. If we don't go faster than this, we'll never get through. Through what? Shouted Grandpa Joe. Aha, said Mr. Wonka. You wait and see. I've been longing to press this button for years, but I've never done it until now. I've been tempted many times. Oh yes, I was tempted, but I couldn't bear the thought of making a great big hole in the roof of the factory. Here we go, boys, up and out. But you don't really mean, oh yes I do, you wait and see, up and out, said Mr. Wonka. But it's made of glass, shouted Grandpa Joe, it'll break into 1,000,000 pieces. I suppose it might, but it's pretty thick glass. The lift rushed on, going up and up and up and faster and faster and faster. Then suddenly crash! The most tremendous noise of splintering wood and broken tiles came from directly above their heads. And Grandpa Joe shouted, help, it's the end, we're done for. And Mr. Wonka said, no, we're not, we're out. Sure enough, the lift had shot right through the roof of the factory and was rising into the sky like a rocket. And the sunshine was pouring in through the glass roof. In 5 seconds, they were 1,000 feet up in the sky. The lift's gone mad, shouted Grandpa Joe. Have no fear, my dear sir, said Mr. Wonka calmly, and he pressed another button. The lift stopped and it hung in the mid-air, hovering like a helicopter. All right, said Grandpa Joe. How does this thing stay up? Sugar power, said Mr. Wonka. 1,000,000 sugar power. Oh, look, there goes the other children, he said, pointing down. They're returning home. We must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else, said Mr. Wonka. He pressed a different button, and the lift dropped lower, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in a little group just outside the gates. I can only see 3, he said. Who's missing? I expect it's Mike TV, Mr. Wonka said, but he'll be coming along soon. Do you see the trucks? Yes, said Charlie. What are they for? Don't you remember what it said on the golden tickets? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of sweets. There's 1 truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim. Aha! There goes our friend Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting into the first truck with his mother and father. Do you mean he's really all right? Even after going up that awful pipe? He's very much all right, said Mr. Wonka. He's changed, said Grandpa Joe. He used to be fat. Now he's thin as a straw. Of course he's changed, said Mr. Wonka. He got squeezed in the pipe, don't you remember? And look, there goes Miss Violet Beauregard, the great gum chewer. It seems as though they managed to de-juice her after all. I'm so glad. And how healthy she looks. But she's purple in the face, cried Grandpa Joe. So she is, said Mr. Wonka. Nothing we can do about that. Good gracious. Look at poor Veruca Salt and Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt. They're simply covered with rubbish. And here comes Mike TV, said Grandpa Joe. Good heavens, what have they done to him? He's about 10 feet tall and as thin as a wire. They overstretched him on the gum stretching machine, said Mr. Wonka. How very careless. How dreadful for him, said Charlie. Nonsense, he's very lucky, said Mr. Wonka. Every basketball team in the country will be trying to get him. But now, it's time we left these 4 silly children. I have something very important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie. Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and the lift swung upward into the sky. The great glass lift was now hovering high over the town. Inside the lift stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. How I love my chocolate factory, said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused and turned around and looked at Charlie with the most serious expression on his face. Do you love it too, Charlie? He asked. Oh, yes, cried Charlie. I think it's the most wonderful place in the world. I'm very pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. He went on staring at Charlie. Yes, he said, I am very pleased indeed to hear you say that. And now I shall tell you why. You see, my dear boy, I've decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours. Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It's quite true, Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly. I'm really giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it? Giving it to him? Gasped Grandpa Joe. You must be joking. I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious. But why should you give your factory to little Charlie? Listen, Mr. Wonka said. I'm an old man. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who's going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over from me. But I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one to whom I can tell all my precious, sweet-making secrets while I'm still alive. So that is why you sent out the golden tickets, cried Charlie. Exactly, said Mr. Wonka. I've decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked best at the end of the day would be the winner. But Mr. Wonka, stammered Grandpa Joe, do you really and truly mean that you're giving the whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie? After all, there's no time for arguments, cried Mr. Wonka. We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family. Charlie's father and his mother and anyone else that's around. They can all live in the factory from now on. They can all help run it until Charlie is old enough to do it by himself. Where do you live, Charlie? Charlie peered down through the glass floor at the snow-covered houses that lay below. It's over there, he said, pointing. It's that little cottage right on the edge of the town, the tiny little one. I see it, said Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the lift shot down towards Charlie's house. "I'm afraid my mother won't come with us," Charlie said sadly. "Why ever not?" "Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George." "But they must come too." "They can't," Charlie said. "They are very old, and they haven't been out of bed for 20 years. "Then we'll take the bed along as well," said Mr. Wonka, "with them in it. There's plenty of room in this lift for a bed." "You couldn't get the bed out of the house," Grandpa Joe said. "It won't go through the door." "You mustn't despair," said Mr. Wonka. "Nothing is impossible. You watch." The lift was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. "What are you going to do?" cried Charlie. "I'm going right on in to fetch them," said Mr. Wonka. "How?" asked Grandpa Joe. "Through the roof," said Mr. Wonka, pressing another button. "No!" shouted Charlie. "Stop!" shouted Grandpa Joe. Crash went the lift, right down through the roof of the house, into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining down on the 3 old ones who were lying in the bed. And each of them thought that the end of the world had come. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in from the next room. "Save us!" cried Grandma Josephine. "Calm yourself, my darling wife," said Grandpa Joe, stepping out of the lift. "It's only us." "Mother! Mother!" cried Charlie, rushing into Mrs. Bucket's arms. "Mother, listen to what's happened. We are all going back to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him run it. And he's given it all to me, and... What are you talking about?" said Mrs. Bucket. "Just look at our house," cried poor Mr. Bucket. "It's in ruins." "My dear sir," said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward and shaking Mr. Bucket warmly by the hand. "I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never going to need it again, anyway." "Who is this crazy man?" screamed Grandma Josephine. "He could have killed us all." "This," said Grandpa Joe, "is Mr. Willy Wonka himself." It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had been happening to them all day. And even when they all refused to ride back to the factory in the lift. "I'd rather die in my bed," shouted Grandma Josephine. "So would I," cried Grandma Georgina. "I refuse to go," announced Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice of their screams, simply pushed the bed into the lift. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after it. Then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka pressed a button. The doors closed. Grandma Georgina screamed, and the lift rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof out into the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and tried to calm the 3 old people, who were still petrified with fear. "Please don't be frightened," he said. "It's quite safe, and we are going to the most wonderful place in the whole world." "Charlie's right," said Grandpa Joe. "Will there be anything to eat when we get there?" asked Grandma Josephine. "I'm starving. The whole family's starving." "Anything to eat?" cried Charlie, laughing. "Oh, you just wait and see." The end. I really hope you enjoyed this story. And now it's time for bed. Under the blankets, snug as a bug. Sleep tight.